Hi, Zabrina. How are you?
I'm so good. How are you, Alec?
Good, good. It's only been 5 or 6 years since we hung out last, where you
Yeah,
spoke at the inaugural Learners event from like way back when.
it
Kicked off a bit
was,
of a movement, but that
yeah.
was really cool because you were one of the key product voices we had talking about kind of like user insights and that sort of thing. So that was a really
Yeah.
fun way to get to meet you.
Oh my gosh, it was so fun. And it didn't feel like an inaugural event. I remember how big it was and how many people were so excited to be there. And it was a great event.
I appreciate that. And, with passage of time, some things stay the same. We're still doing cool stuff, but some things change. And you know, um, one of the big things that has changed I think for both of us since then is becoming parents. And this is the beginning of a whole bunch of conversations we're going to have around this and how to do this successfully. And some of the, a lot of the things that aren't really talked about when it comes to starting this journey yourself and with your partner, with your family.
Hmm.
I remember when we were talking, we were chatting, there was a lot of really interesting things about your experience. So I'm really interested to dig into that. And if you could, can you talk about the last few companies that you worked at? I think most people will recognize them,
Yeah.
but maybe you could paint a little picture there.
Yeah, I'll do like just a little quick intro of myself. So, hi everyone, I'm Zabrina. I spent about 17 years in product management working at companies such as Bitmoji, Snap, Shopify, Wealthsimple, and smaller startups across Toronto, Boston, and Amsterdam. My career's taken me across, again, small startups and large organizations. And along the way, I've also had to navigate the journey of having two awesome kids, which is what we're going to touch on today. Currently, I'm on a little career hiatus. It's a pause I've dreamt of for years.
You
So
got
the
to tell us where you're going. Tell the people at home, like, what is this hiatus? Because you're just telling me, and I got really jealous, and it sounds super cool.
Yeah. Well, what I did is firstly, I slowed down a lot. It was really hard at first and it took me some doing and some real intentionality there. We've been doing a lot of traveling. And then I got to fulfill a 20+ year aspiration of doing my yoga teacher training. So that was an experience that was super challenging, but also deeply rewarding. Because people ask me the next question after that is like, where are you teaching? I am not actively teaching. My goal is to share this practice as a hobby. And so I'm interested in bringing yoga to maybe shelters or seniors' homes where I could maybe share it and make a meaningful difference. So if anyone in the audience has connections to organizations that could benefit from programming like that, please connect with me.
I love that. We can find Sabrina on LinkedIn. I feel like is a good place.
Totally.
And then you're doing some traveling too. That's super fun,
Yeah.
all around the world. So once you get to a certain point, when did you know, like, I'm going to flip this switch? Like, now's the time I'm taking this trip.
So the break itself, it took me years. Like I would plan to take the break and then I'd get excited about a new opportunity or problem to solve and I'd jump into the next thing and I'd be like, next time. And I think that happened to me maybe 3 or 4 times. And that's okay because I also loved all the teams I got to touch on and all the problems I got to solve. But then I reached this point where it just, I guess all things felt right with my kids' ages and where I was. And it was just before summer. And I thought, it's now or never. I just have to kind of take a plunge. And so that's kind of how I ended up doing that.
Cool. I love that. So let's talk about, let's go all the way back to, because I think your first was a pandemic baby. Is that right?
No, that was my second. So my
That was your
first
second
was
one.
in 2015. I had just moved back from Amsterdam, got a few years under my belt at Bitmoji, and that was where I had my first pregnancy and baby.
There you go. Okay. So Bitmoji, when we were talking, this was, I think Bitmoji at the time was probably like a Series B or C startup,
Hmm.
and high flying. They ended up getting bought by Snap, if I
Hmm.
recall correctly.
Yeah.
So if you're a Snapchat user, all those cool cartoons of yourself and your friends, that's what Bitmoji was. It was really cool.
Yeah.
And you were like the first person to go through parental leave there.
Yes.
What was that like?
Yeah. So I was the first non-founder, like the first employee to have a child there. And it was a very fast-paced startup, which meant we didn't have a lot of formal policies in place and, things to just follow and pull up from a drive. And without those formal policies in place, I really had to learn to advocate for myself because I was like, this thing doesn't exist. So let me go do some research and figure out what, best practices are or how I might do this. And then I had to kind of like keep bringing that back to the table to ask questions and to kind of get clarity on my next steps.
So it sounds like it's kind of like the infamous startup policy if we have unlimited vacation, and because you have unlimited vacation, you don't really have full permission to like take 4 days off.
Yeah.
And is that kind of the analogy there, you think?
I think that's a really good one because I was getting a lot of vague answers of like, yeah, take the time you need. Okay, and then come back when you're ready. And yeah, and I was like, but like, how do I help transition somebody who's going to work in my role? What
Right.
will I come back to? And then again, you have to understand like I'm pregnant and I'm trying to and I'm feeling like, oh my God, my career that I've worked so hard for, does this change my career? So I'm feeling all these feels
And you're
while I'm
pregnant
trying
for the
to
first
navigate
time,
this.
right? You don't know
Yeah.
what to expect, right? Because if you're a lot of these younger companies, these startups, there's, a lot of early or late 20 somethings, early 20 somethings, early 30 somethings, right? Most people haven't, like, this is a brand new experience for them. So on top of having to do all this extra work to sort it out, you're going through a lot of changes yourself, and you're trying to, you don't know what to expect yourself.
Exactly. So I didn't know what to expect for myself physically, mentally, my identity. And my identity, a huge part of that is and was like my career. I love what I
Right.
do. And then I was like, how do I navigate this? And what's going to happen when I come back? And then there's also the fear of being forgotten. Like we don't say
Yeah.
that, but it's like we don't want to be forgotten. We're doing this job. And so trying to like navigate all those. And so what I would say to like startups is even if your resources are limited, like responding just quickly with a clear, even if it's a temporary parental leave plan, just makes a big difference for your employees. And now we have like AI tools, like pop something in and like what are best
Right.
practices and how can I make somebody feel comfortable? And you can change that process as necessary. But I think it just gives that reassurance that you have a role here post leave, and like we may not know again we've all been in that like startup world. The company will be a different place 6 months, a year, 18 months from now. So we may not be able to tell you exactly where you'll be, but we can give you the assurance that we will find a place for you. And I think just giving that assurance will go a long way towards fostering trust and loyalty.
I think that's really interesting. And, I can certainly, um, I can empathize with the answers or responses that you received, right? Of
Yeah.
take the time you need, whatever, because and come back when you're ready, because that's like it's work to figure this stuff out and to come up with a policy, and it
Hmm.
might not. I'd say there's probably a real lack of awareness among young founders, maybe, or whatever it happens to be, why you might be asking what the policy, like,
Right.
like you're saying, it's, do I have a place if I am gone for 6 months?
Right.
How will this affect my career trajectory? Will you still trust me? Will the team move on? Like, those are
Yeah.
never things that I think I would thinking about. So I think that's a really interesting point to bring up, that that's part of the growth that has to happen, not just on your side to sort out, but also on their side too.
Right. Yeah, and I think it goes back to like how we think when we're product builders. We should think that way if we're running a company for our employees. Like, let's put
Yeah,
ourselves in their seat. Like when they're asking me that question, do what is it that they're actually trying to hear from me right now? And doing that, like shifting that perspective, I think can really help some of those conversations along. And I think that goes like you want your employees to feel comfortable and then that like they have a place to come back to because they've already done great work for you and you hope that they'll do that when they come
for
back as
sure.
well. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that there's probably a mode that you kind of fall into, which is I think it's a smart default in for the generic request or generic whatever, which is I trust people on my team to do what's right for them and to figure things out and to tell me when they have problems and all that sort of stuff, and use
Yeah.
good judgment and all that. But that doesn't really apply in this case as, like, I think a reasonable way to respond, because there's so much change happening on their side of
Yep.
the equation, and there's a lot of uncertainty too,
For
right?
sure.
So I think that's a really fair point. Do you after that, we're at Shopify, which is
Hmm.
obviously a much larger company and a much more mature company, and
Yeah.
things there were smoother, would you say, for your
Yeah.
second? So
Definitely.
let's do a back to back comparison here. No
Yeah.
shade at Bitmoji, state
No shade at
startup.
all.
You
Yeah.
guys, you're figuring it out. Everyone's got to go through growing pains and whatnot. But what made your experience at Shopify work really well for you?
Yeah. Well, before I even get to the part where I had my next child, because I had a 5 year gap between my kids. So I'll tell you a little bit about like what it was like when I joined Shopify. When I joined Shopify, my son was just over a year old, and I was still adjusting to my identity as a mother. So I'm building myself a new identity, my product person, my hobbies, and myself as a mother. And I was still like adjusting and building that. And then I joined Shopify, and it's this like exciting, vibrant place, this amazing energy. And I felt like I was surrounded by people that were much younger than me. And some of that might have been in my head, but
Yeah,
I was probably among the older people, right? I didn't see a lot of people with kids at the time, but it was just like I
yeah,
was getting to know people, and I was comparing myself to them and questioning if my identity as a mom, what might make other people like doubt my ability or focus to like the ability
yeah.
to do my job. So there's a lot of thoughts going on in my head. And because of that, I actually didn't tell anybody that I had a kid for like a long time at the beginning, maybe like 4 or 5 months.
Did you mention it in the interview process? Like when you're talking about your personal life, it's like as far as most people you worked with knew, this was like
Yeah.
not a thing.
No, not a thing. I don't know. Like I was so nervous about that. Like I hadn't like yet connected it with my full identity, and I was worried that I would be judged for it. Um, and then I eventually found safety in sharing and built my new identity. And so a few months in, I was on a work trip with Brandon. Brandon Chu was my lead at the time, and I told him about my son. And it wasn't like this like big announcement moment. It was just kind of slipped into conversation. I was like, this is a natural moment to say it. And I shared it.
Yeah,
But his reaction left a big impression for me. And he was like genuinely happy and supportive. There was nothing like negative, like, oh, you're a mom, And then he was just like surprised. The only reaction was just like, wait, I can't believe I didn't know that. It's so special that you're a mom.
hmm,
And that gave me a lot of reassurance. And I started opening up about being a mom. And so eventually I felt so safe that that became a big part of my identity. And it is now, which is why I'm sitting here chatting with you.
yeah.
And so I started bringing my son to work and to like events like holiday parties and Halloween parties. He like would nap all over the office. And I have
Love it.
photos of this, and it was so cute. Or if I didn't have childcare in a late meeting, he would just come enjoy the snack wall, play some video games. So he was kind of a
Amazing.
bit of a staple. Yeah. I have a photo of him with Toby at a town hall. He came to a town hall with me. And I think when he sees that when he's older, he's going to be like, whoa, like I got to meet Toby.
That's
Um,
pretty cool.
and
Well,
so,
it's
sorry, go
funny.
ahead.
One thing that so first of all, shout out to Brandon for a lot of folks who know him in or have met him in the Toronto scene. He's a
Mm-hmm.
wonderful guy, doing some cool stuff at the 535 studio. If you know what's up with that, if you're in Toronto, check it out. But one of the things you keep bringing up here, which I think is really worth digging into, is this concept of identity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, why do you think that it was a big transition for you to go from like, I guess, Zabrina, the product builder, the careerist, the doer, to Zabrina that plus something else?
Yeah.
What was that? What was hard about that for you?
I think because that part that I was adding was being a mom, and I feel like societally sometimes we think that like we have this image of moms, they're like so busy and they're flustered and they are just like, like they don't have a lot of time, they're just like only doing that. And I was just worried that that would take away from who I like, all the other things about me. And then I realized like no, I can shape my identity. These are like probably biases that I've picked up along the way and that I'm imposing on myself, right? But I also think it takes a really inclusive, intentional environment to allow somebody to show all sides of themselves, right? So like Shopify's culture was very intentionally built, and it allowed me and welcomed me to bring my whole self. And over time I realized, at like all parts of me and all my identities together are what make me a great product person. Because as I was
Yeah,
thinking about it, I was like, our users are not just a credit card. They're just not a consumer that buys that one product that one time. When we're researching our users, we research their whole selves to understand their motivations. And so having people being able to bring their best selves to the workplace, I think it empowers us to build the most useful and successful products.
Yeah, I think that's cool. I think so I've been talking with a lot of people just in DM in preparing for a bunch of these interviews that we're going to do covering different aspects of stuff. And I think there's definitely, I don't know if it's, I don't know if it's the right thing to say is like society imposing or whatever it is, but there's definitely this palpable feeling of as soon as I start having this other priority in my life, it is going to take away from the success that I've set up and created already for myself
Mm-hmm.
in my career. And I think a lot of what some people wanted to talk about was that that's not actually a real, it's not like a real fork in the road situation where you either have to continue, you get to continue building solo whatever it is, or you divert off this path where you sacrifice that. And a lot of people talked about this like new efficiency that comes with just being way more ruthless about prioritizing what you put your time into. So
Mm-hmm.
a lot fewer meetups and like, random drinks with friends or colleagues or whatever it is. Sometimes you do them, but it's very intentionally, but it's
Mm-hmm.
like, and just changing. So does that kind of resonate with you? Just that, I don't know if it's a ruthless prioritization, but, or recognizing that there's space for success with both of those things.
Yes. So I think the perspective shift that I had was that I could integrate all my identities and make myself better. And so I think becoming a mom didn't make me less efficient. It actually made me more efficient because I needed to get all of the things done and I wanted to prove myself more and more. And so being able to kind of recognize that and bring that forward.
Yeah. When you think about the role, so obviously Shopify is much larger. It's a more mature company. There's people who've been there for a long time are obviously a lot older than the people who've been around for, in air quotes, a long time at your average Series A company,
Mm-hmm.
because it's just a younger thing.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think the role of having other parents successful within the organization plays in setting that precedent? And how does that kind of pave the way for the next batch of parents to find success and manage this transition effectively?
Yeah. I think it's very important. And what I will say is like, I've worked at many different places, right? And there are often leaders that are parents, but that don't share a lot about being a parent. Like, they're a parent, they have maybe a couple kids
It's
at
like
home.
taboo a little bit in a lot of work cultures, right?
Yeah.
Like, why are you talking about that almost?
Yeah, and I think that's what I grew up with, and I'm so happy all of that's changed. So, what was also modeled for me at Shopify before I had my second child was how normal it was to talk about having a child. But the huge one for me was men taking parental leave. And that
Really?
was not something I ever thought about when I had my first. So, me and my husband didn't even have a talk about like, hey, let's split the leave. I don't, it was just this kind of assumed and thing that I planned and we worked through and I took the leave. And then at Shopify, I saw Craig Miller, our CPO, take time to be with his family as when they had a kid. I saw Satish Kanwar take time off to be with his kid. I saw Brandon do that. And I was
Yeah.
like, these guys are leading huge teams and areas of the business. And look at how open and transparent they're being. And they are not, nothing's falling apart. They make sure that they put great leaders in charge. And that's what great leaders do. They train the leaders to like keep things going. And they're at home supporting their child. So that was an interesting conversation and conversations that my husband and I had for almost a year before we decided to start trying again because I really wanted to like share that experience with him and it
Yeah.
wasn't something I even thought about until I had that behavior modeled for me.
So what were some of the, obviously different experience with your first versus your second here. Um, what what was the actual difference in terms of the planning side of things for your family that was different second time versus first time in terms of, so you mentioned this idea of like dad taking time off too.
Hmm.
How did you have those conversations? Like how did they go?
The conversation at home, like with my
Yeah.
partner. Yeah. Yeah. So when we were starting to think about having our second child, so after I had my first, I kind of thought I can't do that ever again. And then like 3 years in, I was like, maybe I could do it one more time. But it took a lot of conversation of like
Yo,
how,
first
yeah,
time kid,
yeah,
that is crazy. That was, I remember it
yeah,
very well where like even when I talk with Maggie about it, she's like there were moments where it's like holy shit, what have we done? Right? Like cuz it's so hard and it's so different, right?
so hard.
Um and then now I have three and it's like I talk about it as like we've shifted to a new time zone, right? Like your whole schedule and lifestyle complete. Once you accept that, it becomes a lot easier second time around, third time around, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But that first time is like super tough, and going through that on your own obviously is like probably extra hard, right?
Yeah.
Because someone else is still living the life from a few months ago that you had, but you're now in this different lifestyle essentially.
Yeah. And then they kind of check in when they're done their old life and then kind of reintegrate
Right.
with you at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll be honest, those conversations were really hard because, again, for my husband, he's an awesome husband, an awesome dad, but those were not behaviors that were modeled for him. So he was like, I don't know, I feel like I can do this whole dad thing without
Yeah.
having to take that time off. And it was a lot of discussion and not always like easy discussions. It took us
For
about a
sure.
year to figure out like how we wanted to navigate having our second child and then kind of like coming to those like outcomes of like how we're going to do it, and we decided how much time each of us would take off. Then I had a pandemic baby and we were just all in the house, and it was like a moot point anyways after that year of discussions.
Yeah, sometimes the universe just, yeah, that was our first, was the pandemic baby. That was like extremely unpleasant at times.
Oh my gosh, yeah, it's hard.
Yeah. 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 What kind of advice, like, cause I agree with what you're saying. I think that, even if we look at our parents' generation, which, that was definitely well into, women are in the workforce, you know, um, families are a little bit different and a little bit more modern, sort of thing like that. But I don't think that I would imagine, based on my limited information at my fingertips from my childhood, that there still wasn't that co-parenting responsibility of like, hey, dad's coming to help with the newborn and mom's. It's usually just mom, right? And so, to your point, there's not really a modeled behavior we're trying to copy here, a path that was already paved for us. How do you recommend people have those conversations as they're going through this and having their first kid, or maybe it's their second kid and the first one was really tough? Do you have any
Hmm.
recommendations for things that actually made the conversation productive in what's obviously a hard conversation sometimes?
Yeah, I think the hardest part is to find the time to sit down and have that intentional discussion because we're all pretty busy, we're running around, and now you have a kid running around too. So by the time you get some time together, often you want to avoid those tougher conversations, but they're really important conversations, as uncomfortable as they are. And then also to share really honestly with the audience, we went to therapy to discuss it because we found that we were having difficulty navigating that conversation, just the two of us. And then we were like, and I love therapy. So I was like, maybe a therapist can help us with the tools and figure out like where some of our resistance or where some of our feelings are coming from on this. And it did help. And it was a process. So I think the biggest thing I could say is the intentionality behind it. The first time we were just like, let's try this thing, let's have a kid. And it was great. But
Hmm.
like then I learned a lot about like, wow, like what it takes and how hard it is and what my expectations might be. I learned a lot through my new experiences at Shopify. And I was like, I'd love to try this again, but in a different way. And that doesn't happen without, kind of pushing through some of those uncomfortable conversations and be okay with it being uncomfortable. It doesn't mean you're not in a
Yeah,
great relationship. It means you two are two human beings trying to work something out.
I think there's, I think maybe it's a little bit different in my case too, because obviously I work with with my wife on the learner stuff. But one of the things that I noticed was that there's really, especially because we work together, but even if you don't work together, just going through this process, there's nowhere for you to hide, in the sense of like, if you are feeling anxious or you're feeling frustrated or you're feeling like you don't have time for some of the things that are important to you, right? You can only keep those simmered down for so long because you used to have all this time to like decompress and distract yourself with other things, and now that's all on time, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're watching the kid, you're taking care of whatever it happens to be,
Yeah.
and learning how to talk with for us, like we're learning how to talk from a place of like, okay, like this is how I'm feeling, this is something that I need, even just saying like I want this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like for me, I want to play basketball from time to time. That's important to me. I still have hoop dreams,
Yeah.
embarrassing as it is to say, but that's like something
Yeah.
that is important to me. And it sounds really trivial,
No,
but
I don't think so.
okay, how do we find a way to make the time for that? Because that's
Mm-hmm.
going to be something that's like having those conversations was like super hard. Like we're not trained to say, I want this thing, or like
Right.
this is I get to be a little bit selfish. I get to say there's some things that I want that's
Yeah.
not, and when the kid comes along, it just becomes so much more important to be honest about
Mm-hmm.
that stuff, even when it's hard.
Of course. And what, like you're saying, you want to go play basketball and you were probably feeling guilt. Like, does that mean I'm taking time away from
Yeah,
my
the
kids
guilt is out
and
of
my
control.
wife? Yeah.
That's probably the biggest thing. It's like not learning how to deal with feelings of guilt, whether it's guilt because you're not being able to work as much as you used to be able to work at work, or guilt that you're not doing enough for the kid, for your partner, in the eyes of your parents. And,
Yeah.
like that's probably like, if there's one emotion that I think new parents need to figure out how to deal with and address head on the most, it's
Yeah.
probably that one. It came up a lot when I was talking to people.
For sure. I want to touch on guilt, but I'm curious. You mentioned, like, because you and Maggie work together, do you have a way of separating work conversations and home, or is it all kind of mixed together and you kind of just have to find your way?
I mean, I feel like I got to ask Maggie about this, but generally speaking, it's kind of all mixed together in a blob.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things, so we've been together for a really long time, even before learners. I think, I don't know how long we've been married, but I want to say it's like 7 years or something like that. I'll get in trouble for this, but but even still, we were dating for like 5 years before that too. We've been together for a very long time. And one of the things that's been really good for our relationship is, this is really a Maggie thing, but she won't let hard conversations slip. She'll
Sure.
like,
Yeah.
she'll like pedal to the metal. No, we got to talk about this thing. So that's always been a thing for us. And then, there's times where somebody might need to just kind of not be in the work conversations for a little bit, especially
Mm-hmm.
around like when we had our more recent kid. It's like, I don't want to hear about this or that for a while or something like
Yeah.
that. I need,
Fair.
I need some time. Um, yeah, it's because we both, I think, are really passionate about this stuff and like what we do.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that we feel like we do for fun almost, that we
Yeah.
we get to do as a job, which is great, but it's
That's
all one
awesome.
thing.
Yeah. That's awesome. And yeah, that you found what works for you. And I love that she like puts the pedal to the metal on those conversations. I've learned I'm a bit avoidant. So I
Yeah,
have to like
me too.
force myself to like, oh, I have to do this thing and we have to talk about
Yeah,
the thing.
yeah, yeah. It's tough. Yeah, and I think the other thing is like, it's not a one size fits all sort of thing to a lot of these. I feel like, and I'm definitely speaking a little bit for Maggie here too, but so much of the stuff that you read, whether they're books or blogs, or it's just like, hey, you're having this problem, here's the solution.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, maybe that works, but that's not the only way.
Yeah.
And I think especially if you're very career oriented and you want to try and find, like there are people that for them parental leave involves them still being involved in work in some capacity because
Mm-hmm.
they get fulfillment from that and they're
Yeah.
excited about the work, and they don't want to, be so disconnected from the decision making because they feel connected to the projects, whatever it happens. Like that should be fine if
Absolutely.
that's what you want and that's right for your family,
Yeah.
but that's not, I've never heard anybody say, you know what you should consider on your parental leave? try doing like 2 half days a week in the office to reconnect with the stuff that you're passionate about. Like
Yeah.
that should be fine. Like
Absolutely.
if that's what you want.
Like whatever works for the individual. And so like I mentioned, I had my baby June 2020, so height of pandemic, and I had my first mat leave that I thought I was going to kind of compare it to, and then we're trapped in the house and I couldn't go out and meet friends and do all the things that I wanted to do. I went back to work, I think like 8 months earlier than I planned to, because
Yeah.
I was like, I'm at home anyways and I can work from
Yeah.
home and I need to do this. And I struggled with the decision for, I was like, am I being a bad mom? I'm not giving her the same experience. Screw it. That's what was right for me at
Yeah.
the time. I got so much fulfillment from that. I felt so much happier. And she was close by. The whole family, we were all trapped in the house anyways. And that was what worked for me the second time around. And it was completely different. And it really helped me with my mental health
Yeah.
and that being connected into my work.
I just got to rant on this for a second.
Yeah.
This really pisses me off. Not what you did. This this is great for you.
Yeah.
But um I feel like there's this philosophy where you can be everything to everyone, or especially for your child. There's this like hypothetical 100% perfect whatever.
Hmm.
And I'm sorry, but if that makes you as a parent, especially as a mom, frustrated, makes you crazy, makes you miserable, that's probably not going to be the optimal solution for your child. Like,
Yeah.
you want mom and dad to be happy and excited, and obviously there's challenging times no matter what, but like it just doesn't work very well if you're
Yeah.
unhappy. So if you're happier where you just, you know what, I'm going to have like 4 incredible hours with this baby today, but I
Hmm.
also want to put 4 great hours in at work, because that will just give me more energy to be more present, more connected, more whatever. Like that's got to be okay. That just has
Of
to be
course.
fine.
And your kids will love to see you with your identity and your passions. They will
100%.
love that. My kids talk to me about my work. My son's homesick right now and he was
Oh no.
also sick yesterday. So he was like watching me like prep for this podcast with you. And then he knew that I start at 1 o'clock and he was like, "Oh, cool. Can I be on your podcast?" He's trying to make a YouTube
Yo,
channel
he can come in
downstairs.
right now if he wants to say hi. I'm 100% down with it.
Yeah.
Um,
And he's trying to
we
make
got
a
we got to do
YouTube
a whole
channel
other
and
one on sick
make a
kids.
podcast too. Sorry?
We got to do a whole other one on sick kids, because right now my toddler has had diarrhea for his like 11th day in a row. It's been
Oh, that's
pretty
rough.
miserable.
That's
Yeah.
rough. I'm
We
sorry.
finally got the doctor's note, so the daycare can't send him home anymore because he's fine, but
Yeah.
just
Not contagious
recovering
anymore. Take them.
digestive. Yes. Everybody relax. Just change his diapers. It's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's yeah, I think like, there's all this pressures on new parents, especially on new parents. I feel like our parents' generation didn't necessarily tell us to like relax and just like, it's going to be fine. Just calm
Yeah.
down a little bit, take 2 steps back, take a deep breath, reevaluate. But that seems like a key theme that we need to be all up about,
For sure.
essentially.
For sure. And I think living in Amsterdam before we had kids helped me to see another parenting style where the kids come along to the things you're more passionate about and was a little bit less stressed. And I think I tried to adopt some of that
Yeah.
into my parenting as well. And I really like just being able to kind of learn from different places and piece together what works for me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. There's like a well-known book like about raising children in France. It's like bringing up baby or
Maybe.
something
Yeah.
like that. Yeah, okay. Apparently people know about it.
Yeah.
But they have like a whole different philosophy on a bunch of stuff. And I think yeah, like to your point, I think one of the things they talk about is like, yeah, the kid fits your lifestyle. Like it's not the other way around, which is, you know, not something you always hear about, which I think
Yeah.
is an interesting idea.
Yeah.
Um, What do you think are some of the things so we talked about, the different ways that your workplace can support you. Are there specific policies that you think are wise for companies to adopt that gives, and I want to say moms in particular, because obviously there's a different level of physical toll and requirement that moms have that dads don't have. But are there specific policies that you think are really smart for companies to adopt or for workers to advocate for that allow for essentially the flexibility to do what's right for each individual, right? So, you said in this one situation you came back earlier, in other situations people might want to take more time. Is there anything that comes to mind that you think that this is actually a super great policy that more companies should be adopting?
So I think the most important thing, firstly, is have a policy so somebody can go and just be like, okay, this is what happens. And even if that's the bare minimum legal requirements, make that
Hmm.
super clear. Then if you can add on top of that, and you have the ability as a company, do that if you can, right? So like again, smaller startups, you can't do that, but it's just thinking about like culturally, who do we want to be? Who do we want to attract in our
Can
like
can
long
can
term?
I touch on that for a second? Like,
Yeah.
what are the particular components of a policy that you think were really important? So you went through this experience of being a mom in these two, having kid in these two different situations,
Hmm.
right? So I'm somewhere there's a policy document or a
Yeah.
Notion page or something. What are the sections that you're scrolling to look at where it's like, I'm looking for clarity on this?
Right. So I would say clarity around picking your last day. So does the company have a preference? Can you just pick? Do I go 2 weeks before my due date? Can I work right up until my due date? So how do I like pick that date? How do I communicate that with my leader? Clarity around, transitioning. Because when you talk about that, you're like, okay, like I want to like you want to leave the place in the best place you can. So even
Yeah.
just like some guidance on like start working on your transition plan X number of weeks in advance. If you don't have a person to transition to, talk to this person, talk to your lead, talk to HR, whomever it is. So understanding your transition up, booking your date back, have right in your policies that reassurance, like you will be coming back here. And maybe just, we may not know exactly where, but it will be an equal position, maybe in a parallel role, maybe in a parallel team, depending on where we are. We just don't know because it depends
Things can
on your length of
change,
leave.
whatever. But I
Exactly.
honestly, just even that point and being very clear about that wouldn't have occurred to me as that being like one of the most important things to do. So like we have one team member who had a kid recently while she's working with us. And now obviously we're a very, very small team, like, and
Mhm.
I don't think we really would function well if we had anybody else in her role. So obviously there was a space for her to come back to, but I never would have thought that like the idea of it being a concern that you could not have a job to come back to or not have the same role to come back to. But that obviously seems like a smart thing to clarify very explicitly that that is not going to be a thing to worry about.
Yeah. Like in hindsight, all these years later, if I put myself in the shoes of my lead, I think what he was unsure of was being able to guarantee I'm going to do the exact same role.
Yeah.
And but what he could have just said is like, you will be doing something, we can't wait to have you back, but first take care of yourself and your
Yeah.
baby and then come back. But because he was unable to give me the certainty on the exact role, he wasn't giving me any certainty at all. And that
Ooh.
left me in a place of anxiety. I was like, do I actually have a job when I come back? What's
Ah.
going to happen? And then there's all those voices in your head and the stories you're telling yourself. So I was like, do I have a job? They didn't hire a contractor in my stead. They hired a permanent person. So I was like, oh my
Right.
God. And then again, putting on my leadership role, I'm like, the team's going to grow in the next 6 to 8 months. So of
Yeah.
course, like hiring a permanent person's better than a contractor. But to me at the time, I
Yeah.
felt like I was being replaced. I was like, oh my God,
How
I
can
don't
how
have a job.
can leaders be better at communicating? Because I feel like obviously a lot of, I mean, it's not the only thing that's important to think about, but a lot of this comes down to what information you're told, whether it's proactive or reactive, what's documented, what's not. A lot of this comes down to communication in one form or another.
Yeah.
What are the ways that people can be more clear? Would you feel like, I don't know if this is an appropriate question to ask an individual, but like, should this person while you were on leave just shoot you a text and be like, hey, just a heads up, we're hiring a permanent role as your backfill, but we're expecting to increase headcount by 20% this year. So like we still got lots of stuff to do and you're going to be coming back in a good shape. Would that have been an appropriate thing? Is that something that you would have wanted to hear?
I think personally, I would have liked to hear that over a phone call. I think if I just
Right.
got the text, I would have been like, I still would have had that feeling of being
Right.
replaced. I think you're just going through a lot of feels when you're leaving a
Yeah.
team you've built, and so just having a conversation, I think, would be better. This person was hired while I was still there, and I was training them, and I was getting
Yeah.
helping them like integrate with the team. But at the same time, I couldn't help but feel that feeling of being replaced and not sure like
Yeah.
where I would be when I come back.
Yeah. What kind of, so a couple things that I want to end off on here. One is about spouses, in this case, generally dads, but the person who's not given birth to the kid.
Hmm.
And then the other is just for the person who is. But what are the things that come to mind that you think are really important from a support point of view from your spouse, essentially, to, whether it's your first kid, second kid, whatever it is, to make sure that everyone's set up for as much success as you can be with all this change?
Yeah. So many things. I think making sure they're a hands-on parent, having those conversations. I think we're in a very different era than when I had my first child. So even if you're the not the parent who didn't give birth, being a part of that journey and having some of that leave, I think is something that's super important if it's feasible for your family. Having the conversation with your partner, because I think everyone's different. So what I needed, what someone else needs might be different, but asking like, hey, what do you need? Do you need time to go to a couple more meetups and keep in contact with your work friends because I know you love that? Or, what is it that you need during this time? And then also to share your personal needs. I want to go play basketball once a week
Yeah.
because like I still got my hoop dreams, and both of you having that like back and forth conversation.
Yeah, I think, it's weird because, like, if you think about the question I just asked, like, how can, let's say, dad support or whatever? And one of the things that you just brought up was, tell me what you want. Like, dad, what do you want? Because I need to know those things too.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's, coming back to the importance of having that honest conversation around those things.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I can remember this was purely accidental, but one of the things that with our first kid that ended up being really helpful was same time every morning, I would take our newborn for a 2-hour walk, and she would obviously nap on me and whatnot. And luckily, the weather was cooperative because it was May.
Yeah, that's so nice.
But it turned out that, like, having 2 hours of, because you go from being, in this case, super independent, do whatever you want, to having a small being just attached to you constantly. Just getting 2 hours of like not like having your body back almost,
Yeah.
I feel like, and
Huge.
space again was ended up being a really important thing.
Yeah.
um, that was just happened to be coincidental in my case, but that was an interesting one.
Oh, it's so
um,
nice. And you got that bonding time
oh
too.
yeah, that was sick. We had a great time. I took so many photos of us, just like sitting down, walking down to Lake Ontario, and just sitting on a bench. It was great. No
Oh,
regrets. Unfortunately, I don't live near there anymore, but it was really good times. I'll never forget that.
oh.
For the moms, what do you got? Like, how, whether it's for advocating for yourself, setting yourself up for success, like, what are the things that you think are the most important to do if you're about to start on this journey?
Um, A few things. So I remember like talk to a lot of people, get a lot of diverse perspectives from people as you're about to embark on this journey. Don't feel shy to ask, and because I think a lot more people are open about talking about it. I remember at Shopify there was someone who was about to transition, wanting to transition into product. And she came to me and said, I asked somebody about this, and he told me I shouldn't consider this career if I ever want to have a family. My jaw dropped and I was like, "Excuse me?" Like, and
Uh-oh.
I'm so glad she didn't end the conversation there and that she asked
Yeah.
more people. So when we talked, I was like, "Hey, you've seen Kaden at the office. You know I'm a mom and you like we're doing great work together. Like you can do this. You can absolutely do this." And I shared
Yeah.
examples of other people and she went on to join product. She's doing super well and I just follow her career, has a child. And it's just so wonderful to see. So get lots of perspectives, talk to lots of people, like follow the people that model your behavior, or the behaviors or the career path you want to see, like Deb Liu,
Yeah.
who's CEO at Ancestry, and I met her when she was back at Facebook, like, and leads women in products. Like, she was one of my like people who I keep and I still look up to, and I learn from her career. So, who do you want to like model yourself after? Learn from them, follow their content, just get all those diverse perspectives, and don't be scared. You can do this. Like, it's going to be this amazing, super challenging thing, and just take all the great things you've learned in your career and apply those to part like this new thing, and you'll just keep getting better.
Yeah. I love that. And I totally agree. You can totally do it. And the thing that I would say to build off on why it's doable is you'll realize that there's a lot of things that you're investing your time and energy into that you can just stop doing that. And it's fine.
Yeah,
It's going to be fine.
totally.
Cool. Zabrina, it was so great to catch up again. I hope we can have you back again soon. And thank you for all the wonderful stories and advice. I think hopefully we'll inspire a lot more either existing parents to continue their careers and also people who are considering starting families that this is a totally doable thing.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. I loved catching up in our conversation and would love to see you again soon.
Yeah, definitely will. Okay, take care, everyone. We'll catch you on the next episode.
Bye.